The gathering storm, Caesar, Pompey, and the African theater. The Roman Republic stood at the precipice of transformation, a state battered by political intrigue, military ambition, and the ceaseless struggle for dominance between its most powerful figures. By the time Gaius Julius Caesar had decisively taken control of Italy and routed Pompey's forces in Hispania, the conflict was far from over. Caesar now turned his gaze eastward, where Pompey and the Senate's remaining forces held a stronghold in Greece. However, the war extended beyond this immediate confrontation. Another crucial theater of conflict loomed in North Africa. Control of this region meant control of Rome's grain supply, a vital resource for sustaining an army and a political base. Enter Gaius Scribonius Curio, one of Caesar's most trusted allies, a man whose political savvy far exceeded his battlefield experience. Entrusted with the task of securing Africa, Curio's campaign would prove to be a defining moment in the wider struggle between Caesar and Pompey. His march into the sands of North Africa, though promising at first, would ultimately become a cautionary tale of hubris, miscalculation, and the unforgiving nature of war. The strategic importance of Africa. The province of Africa, particularly its fertile lands in modern-day Tunisia, was among Rome's most valuable territories. The granaries of Africa fed the ever-growing population of the capital, and controlling this supply line meant the ability to sustain armies and influence the political landscape of Rome itself. Caesar understood this well, recognizing that if Pompey's allies maintained their grip on Africa, they could use starvation as a weapon, cutting off the supply lines to the Italian heartland. Pompey's control in Africa was spearheaded by Publius Attius Verus, a seasoned commander who had previously governed the province. However, his forces were relatively inexperienced, hastily recruited from local levies and Roman exiles who had pledged their allegiance to the Senate. What Verus lacked in numbers and quality of troops, he sought to make up for with alliances, most notably with King Juba I of Numidia. Juba I was no mere auxiliary ally, he was a ruler with a personal vendetta against Caesar and his faction. Years earlier, Caesar had humiliated Juba in the Senate, and now, given the opportunity, Juba was eager to repay the insult with steel and blood. His Numidian cavalry, widely regarded as among the best in the ancient world, would prove to be a decisive factor in the coming battles. Curio's arrival in Sicily and the preparations for war. Despite being an orator and politician first, Curio's ambition and loyalty to Caesar earned him command of 4 legions. These legions, however, were not the seasoned veterans who had marched with Caesar across Gaul. Many were freshly recruited, lacking the discipline and battle-hardened experience of Caesar's core forces. Curio's advisors included Lucius Marcius Rubilus, a veteran of the Gallic Wars, who was meant to provide the strategic guidance Curio lacked. The campaign began with promise. Curio swiftly secured Sicily, ensuring an unchallenged route to North Africa. By late summer, with word of Caesar's success in Hispania bolstering his confidence, Curio set sail with his legions, landing near modern-day Tunisia. However, rather than proceeding with caution, he opted for swift aggression, seeking to engage the Pompeian forces before they could consolidate their strength. Success breeds overconfidence. Upon landing, Curio's forces moved quickly, capturing key supply points and intimidating local settlements into submission. His early victories inflated his confidence, leading him to underestimate the challenges ahead. He viewed Verus as a minor obstacle, dismissing warnings of Numidian reinforcements. His first engagement with Verus's forces near Utica seemed to confirm his bold approach. The Roman cavalry clashed with Numidian skirmishers, pushing them back into the fortified city. This early success led his troops to hail him as Imperator, a premature title that only fueled Curio's belief that victory was within reach. The fatal underestimation of Juba. What Curio failed to fully grasp was that Verus was not his true opponent. Juba was. While Curio focused on besieging Utica, Juba's army, reinforced with elite Numidian cavalry and Roman-trained infantry, was already on the move. When reports of Juba's advance reached Curio, he initially dismissed them as exaggerations. Even when scouts confirmed the presence of a significant Numidian force, he assumed that only a fraction of Juba's full army was present. Determined to deliver a decisive blow, Curio led his army out to meet the Numidians near the river Bagradas. This was his gravest error. He had underestimated not just the strength of Juba's forces, but the tactical superiority of Numidian cavalry. The open plains of North Africa provided the ideal battleground for Juba's horsemen, who could outmaneuver and harass the Roman formations without engaging in direct combat. To disaster at Bagradas, Curio's forces, exhausted from their march, found themselves encircled. Jubo's cavalry executed hit-and-run attacks, wearing down the Roman infantry. As panic set in, discipline collapsed. Attempts to form defensive squares failed as Numidian horsemen exploited gaps, cutting down legionaries with ease. The battle was not a clash but a massacre. Curio, realizing the scale of his mistake, refused to abandon his men. He died fighting, his body lost amidst the slaughtered ranks of his legions. Back at the Roman camp, news of the disaster spread like wildfire. The remnants of Curio's force scrambled for escape, but the sheer chaos led to many drowning in their desperate attempt to flee by sea. Those who remained surrendered to Verus, ensuring that Africa would remain in Pompeian hands for now. A lesson in hubris. Curio's campaign in Africa serves as one of the starkest examples of how ambition, when not tempered by strategic foresight, can lead to catastrophe. His overconfidence in his ability to swiftly dominate Africa blinded him to the realities of warfare in the region. His failure to recognize the Numidians as a formidable force cost him not only his own life but the lives of thousands of Roman soldiers. For Caesar, the loss of Africa was a severe setback, delaying his plans and forcing him to rethink his approach. But it was not the end. The great struggle between Caesar and Pompey would continue, shifting to the battlefields of Greece, where an even greater confrontation awaited. The march to Greece, Pompey's gamble and Caesar's pursuit. With the African campaign ending in disaster for Caesar's forces, the focus of the great Roman civil war shifted once more. The battleground now moved to Greece, where Pompey the Great, the champion of the Senate and self-proclaimed defender of the Republic, was gathering his legions. Here, he sought to deliver the final, crushing blow to Caesar and his ambitions. However, Pompey faced an adversary unlike any other. Caesar had already defied the odds multiple times, and he was far from finished. The gathering of forces. After his triumph in Hispania, Caesar wasted no time. He knew that Pompey, despite his setbacks in Italy and Spain, still commanded the larger force. The Senate faction had retreated eastward, using Greece as their stronghold to regroup, recruit, and prepare for what they believed would be the decisive battle to end Caesar's rebellion. Pompey's army was formidable, consisting of legions drawn from the eastern provinces, battle-hardened veterans, and fresh recruits from Rome's allies. His navy, commanded by Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, controlled the seas, making a direct crossing from Italy into Greece a logistical nightmare for Caesar. Yet, Caesar was no stranger to impossible odds. Crossing the Adriatic. The Adriatic Sea was Pompey's first line of defense. Bibulus' fleet patrolled the waters, ensuring that Caesar's legions could not cross unchallenged. Traditional military logic dictated that Caesar should wait, build up his own navy, and prepare a methodical campaign. But that was not his way. Speed, surprise, and sheer willpower had won him his past victories, and he would rely on these once more. Caesar assembled his forces in the ports of Brundisium. He lacked the ships to transport his entire army in one trip, but he chose to cross with a smaller force first, knowing full well the risks. In January 48 BC, under the cover of darkness and winter storms, Caesar made his move. His legions, outnumbered and undersupply, landed on the shores of Greece before Pompey could react. The War of Maneuver. Once on Greek soil, Caesar's predicament was dire. His forces were scattered, with half of his army still in Italy awaiting transport. Pompey, recognizing his advantage, sought to trap Caesar and force him into a battle he could not win. However, despite being cut off from reinforcements and supplies, Caesar demonstrated his military genius yet again. Rather than rushing into battle, he played a game of deception and maneuver. His small army moved swiftly, securing key locations, gathering resources, and fortifying positions. He relied on speed and unpredictability, keeping Pompey guessing. Meanwhile, he sent desperate orders back to Italy, urging Mark Antony to bring reinforcements as soon as possible. Antony's breakthrough. Back in Italy, Mark Antony was facing his own challenges. Bibulus' fleet continued to blockade the coastline, making a second crossing incredibly dangerous. Yet, Antony, following in Caesar's footsteps, opted for boldness over caution. He seized an opportunity when a storm scattered Pompey's fleet, launching a rapid and daring crossing with the remaining legions. Against all odds, he successfully landed in Greece, reuniting with Caesar. With his army now reinforced, Caesar finally had the numbers to face Pompey in open battle. However, Pompey was no fool. He knew that Caesar, despite his reputation, was still at a disadvantage. Rather than rushing into battle, he aimed to starve Caesar out, using his superior resources and supply lines to force his enemy into submission. The siege of Dyrrhachium. Realizing that Pompey was avoiding direct confrontation, Caesar took the initiative and laid siege to the strategically vital city of Dyrrhachium. This would be a battle of endurance rather than brute force. Caesar constructed an elaborate network of fortifications, attempting to cut off Pompey's supplies and force him into battle on his terms. For weeks, both sides engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse. Skirmishes broke out along the siege lines, and Caesar's men, despite their grit, began to suffer from starvation. Pompey, meanwhile, remained patient, knowing that time was on his side. A costly defeat. Eventually, Caesar's hunger for victory led him to overextend his forces. In a rare moment of miscalculation, he launched an ambitious assault on Pompey's positions. The attack backfired spectacularly. Pompey counterattacked, breaking through Caesar's lines and forcing him into a hasty retreat. For the first time in the war, Caesar had suffered a clear defeat. Yet, even in retreat, Caesar managed to maintain discipline within his ranks. His ability to rally his forces, even after suffering losses, prevented a total rout. He withdrew from Dyrrhachium, knowing that the war was far from over. The road to Pharsalus. Pompey, emboldened by his victory, now believed he had Caesar on the run. The Senate, ever confident in their chosen champion, pressured Pompey to finish the war once and for all. Caesar, however, had one more trick up his sleeve. Rather than retreating in disarray, he led his army inland, drawing Pompey further into Greece. He knew that Pompey's strength lay in his numbers, his cavalry, and his ability to resupply. By moving the battlefield further from Pompey's strongholds, Caesar sought to even the odds. The decisive battle of the Roman Civil War was about to take place, in a field near a small town called Pharsalus. The calm before the storm. Caesar's campaign in Greece had been one of improvisation, resilience, and audacity. Despite setbacks, he had managed to keep his army intact, setting the stage for one of the most legendary battles in Roman history. Pompey, despite his advantages, now faced a Caesar who had been pushed to his limits yet remained as dangerous as ever. The clash at Pharsalus would determine the fate of Rome itself. The fate of the Republic now rested in the hands of two men who had once been allies, but were now the bitterest of enemies. The Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar's masterstroke and Pompey's fall. The year 48 BC had seen Julius Caesar navigate seemingly insurmountable obstacles. After the hardships of Dyrrhachium, where his forces barely escaped disaster, many expected him to retreat in disarray. But Caesar was not a man who conceded defeat easily. He regrouped, adapted, and instead of fleeing, he led his forces inland into central Greece. His ultimate goal was clear: to draw Pompey into a battle that would decide the fate of Rome itself. That battle would come near the town of Pharsalus. The two armies prepare. By the time the two great generals stood opposite each other at Pharsalus, the differences between their forces were stark. Pompey commanded nearly 50,000 men, with a cavalry force of around 7,000, provided by his eastern allies. These troops were well supplied and bolstered by months of preparation. Pompey's plan was simple: use his superior numbers to envelop and crush Caesar's forces. Caesar, in contrast, commanded about 22,000 battle-hardened legionaries, veterans who had fought alongside him in Gaul. While outnumbered more than 2-1, they had something Pompey's army lacked: an unbreakable bond of loyalty to their general. Caesar's troops had followed him through conquest, hardship, and near starvation, and they knew that their leader had never let them down before. Pompey's fatal strategy. Pompey was under immense pressure from the Senate and his allies to finish Caesar once and for all. Many within his camp were already celebrating, convinced that victory was inevitable. Confident in his overwhelming cavalry advantage, Pompey devised a strategy that would rely on a massive flanking maneuver. He positioned his cavalry on the left wing, intending to drive back Caesar's right flank, encircle his forces, and crush them. It was a sound plan in theory, but it carried one fatal flaw: Pompey underestimated Caesar's ability to anticipate his moves. Caesar's counterstroke. On the morning of August 9th, 48 BC, the two armies clashed. Pompey's cavalry, just as planned, launched a sweeping attack against Caesar's right flank. But instead of collapsing, Caesar's troops executed a maneuver that Pompey had not foreseen. Anticipating the cavalry charge, Caesar had positioned a hidden reserve force of elite legionaries behind his main lines. As Pompey's horsemen advanced, these hidden troops surged forward, attacking the cavalry from the flanks and cutting them down in brutal close combat. The effect was catastrophic. Pompey's cavalry, expecting an easy victory, was thrown into confusion. With nowhere to retreat, they were slaughtered or fled the battlefield in disarray. With his cavalry shattered, Pompey's entire strategy collapsed. Caesar's right wing, instead of crumbling, surged forward and attacked the now exposed flank of Pompey's main army. The rout of Pompey's army. Seeing his well-laid plan unravel before his eyes, Pompey lost his nerve. Instead of rallying his men, he reportedly abandoned his command post and fled back to his camp. His soldiers, seeing their commander retreat, followed suit. Caesar's legions, disciplined and relentless, pressed their attack. The battlefield turned into a slaughter, with thousands of Pompey's men cut down as they attempted to flee. By the end of the battle, over 15,000 of Pompey's soldiers lay dead, and another 24,000 surrendered. Caesar, ever the pragmatic leader, treated the defeated troops with clemency, allowing many to join his ranks rather than executing them. Pompey himself, however, did not wait for the outcome. He had already fled, heading toward Egypt, hoping to seek asylum with the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. The end of Pompey. Caesar's victory at Pharsalus was absolute, but his old rivals still lived. Knowing that Pompey was escaping to Egypt, Caesar immediately set off in pursuit. However, upon arriving in Alexandria, he was met with shocking news. Ptolemy XIII, seeking to curry favor with the victor, had ordered Pompey's assassination. The once mighty general of Rome was betrayed, cut down by his supposed allies, before he could even step foot on Egyptian soil. When presented with Pompey's severed head, Caesar reportedly wept. Despite their enmity, Pompey had once been his friend, his political ally, and one of Rome's greatest military minds. His death, far from being a cause for celebration, marked the tragic end of an era. With Pompey dead, the civil war was far from over. Caesar had won the battle, but he still had to secure Rome and eliminate the remaining Senate resistance. His next challenge would take him deep into the political chaos of Egypt, where he would become entangled in the infamous power struggle between Ptolemy XIII and his sister, Cleopatra. The fate of Rome and the course of history was about to take another unexpected turn. The aftermath of Pharsalus, Caesar's final triumph, and the fate of Rome. The Battle of Pharsalus had sealed Pompey's fate and left Caesar in control of Rome's destiny. Yet, despite his overwhelming victory, his troubles were far from over. The remnants of Pompey's faction still resisted him, and the political landscape of the Mediterranean was anything but stable. Caesar's next steps would take him from the intrigues of Egypt to the final campaigns that would cement his dominion over the Roman world. Cleopatra and the Alexandrian War. Caesar arrived in Egypt in pursuit of Pompey, only to find that his old rival had been treacherously murdered by the advisors of Pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. While this eliminated a political threat, it's also created a new one. Ptolemy's court expected Caesar to be grateful for the deed, but instead, he was enraged at the dishonorable execution of a Roman consul and former ally. This put him at odds with the young pharaoh, setting the stage for a new conflict. It was in Alexandria that Caesar met Cleopatra VII, a woman whose intelligence, charisma, and political acumen were equal to any Roman statesman. Cleopatra sought Caesar's support in her own struggle for power against her brother, and she proved persuasive. Caesar soon found himself embroiled in the Alexandrian War, fighting not only Ptolemy XIII's forces, but also the volatile politics of the Egyptian court. After months of brutal urban warfare, Caesar and Cleopatra emerged victorious. Ptolemy XIII was killed, and Cleopatra was installed as Egypt's ruler, securing a vital ally for Caesar's future ambitions. Their alliance was not merely political. Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy XV, better known as Caesarion. Though he never officially acknowledged the child, this relationship would have lasting ramifications for the future of Rome and Egypt. The war's last stand. With Egypt secured, Caesar turned his attention back to Rome's remaining enemies. Though Pompey was dead, his supporters, led by Metellus Scipio, Cato the Younger, and King Jubal I of Numidia, had regrouped in Africa. The Senate's last stronghold was in Utica, where they gathered their forces for one last stand. Caesar wasted no time. He landed in Africa in 46 BC and faced off against the remnants of Pompey's faction at the Battle of Thapsus. Once again, his veteran legions proved superior. The Senate's forces were utterly crushed, with thousands slain or captured. Juba and Scipio took their own lives, and Cato, refusing to surrender, famously committed suicide in Utica, choosing death over living under Caesar's rule. With the Senate's last major army destroyed, the war was all but over. However, Pompey's two sons, Gnaeus and Sextus Pompey, had managed to escape to Hispania, where they rallied another force. In 45 BC, Caesar launched his final campaign against them, culminating in the Battle of Munda. This was one of the hardest-fought battles of his career, but in the end, his forces prevailed. Gnaeus Pompey was killed, and Sextus fled, marking the true end of the civil war. Caesar's triumph and the dawn of a new Rome. With no remaining opposition, Caesar returned to Rome as its undisputed ruler. He was granted numerous honors, including the title of dictator for life. He set about implementing sweeping reforms, from restructuring the calendar leading to the Julian calendar to expanding Roman citizenship and centralizing power in his own hands. However, his absolute control unsettled many within the Senate. While Caesar proclaimed himself a leader of the people, his growing power led to whispers of tyranny. A group of senators, believing themselves to be the last defenders of the Republic, began plotting his downfall. The assassination of Caesar. On March 1544 BC, Caesar entered the Senate, unaware that it would be his last day. A conspiracy led by Brutus, Cassius, and other senators had formed with the singular goal of ending his rule. As he took his seat, they struck, stabbing him multiple times. According to legend, his final words were "Et tu, brute," a tragic acknowledgement of betrayal by one he considered a friend. With Caesar's death, Rome was thrown into chaos once more. Instead of restoring the Republic, the assassination led to another power struggle, one that would end with the rise of Caesar's heir, Octavian, who would later become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The end of the Republic, the birth of an empire. The Great Roman Civil War had begun as a struggle between two men, but it ended with the complete transformation of Rome. Caesar's victory ensured that the Republic, as it had existed for centuries, would never return. His assassination did not bring back senatorial rule, but instead paved the way for imperial authority. Within a few years, Octavian would emerge as Rome's first emperor, marking the dawn of the Roman Empire. Caesar's legacy, both as a general and a statesman, would endure for millennia. His name became synonymous with power, and his influence shaped the course of history. Though he fell to assassins' blades, his vision for Rome ultimately prevailed.